Number 25. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. In the middle of the largest war in history, for his first speech to the House of Commons as Britain's Prime Minister on May 13, 1940, Winston Churchill proved that England was in more capable hands. He wasted no time in calling the people to arms as he echoed Theodore Roosevelt's famous phrase of blood, sweat, and tears. Number 24. What to the slave is the 4th of July? Frederick Douglass was a former slave and a quote-unquote engineer for the Underground Railroad, who became an abolitionist. He was disillusioned by the effects of the Fugitive Slave Act, so when he was asked to speak on the 4th of July celebration in 1852 in Rochester, New York, he took the opportunity to point out the hypocrisy of the nation in celebrating the ideals of freedom when it was mired by slavery. Number 23. The decision to go to the moon. When the Soviet Union launched the first man into space, its government flaunted this as evidence that communism is far superior over corrupt capitalism. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy boldly declared his decision in Houston, Texas, to put the first man on the moon, which was accomplished by the end of 1960. Number 22. The 40th anniversary of DDay. A moving tribute to the Army Rangers who perished in Pointe du Hoc on D-Day, it was delivered by President Ronald Reagan on June 6, 1984 to honor the original 225 Rangers, only 90 of which survived and of whom almost all were in attendance. These soldiers fended off German attackers for 2 days without reinforcements. Number 21. The Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. A true master of written words, it was seldom that William Faulkner publicly displayed his talent for spoken word until he gave this speech on December 10, 1950 in Stockholm, Sweden, for his contribution to American literature. As both the United States and the Soviet Union raced to develop more advanced nuclear weapons, he gave a very scared nation hope with his inspirational speech. Number 20. The Resignation Speech. The resignation speech given by George Washington on December 23, 1784 in Annapolis, Maryland, at the end of the Revolutionary War, supposedly brought tears to the eyes of the members of the Congress and to all the spectators present. As a major general and commander-in-chief, he had the possibility of retaining power, but instead chose to do the right thing by tendering his resignation. It was so emotional, and Washington trembled so much that he had to hold on to the parchment with both of his hands to keep it steady while delivering the speech. Number 19. The Man with the Muck-rake. Theodore Roosevelt's Man with the Muck-rake address summed up the social and economic situation of the country on the historic day in 1906 when it was delivered. One of Roosevelt's most important speeches, it is of inestimable value as a guide to the man in his era. Number 18. Address to the Nation on the Challenger. On January 28, 1986, millions of Americans were glued to their television sets as they watched 7 Americans, including the first ever civilian astronaut, the 37-year-old schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, lift off aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. After just 73 seconds, the shuttle was consumed in a fireball, sending everyone watching it into shock in what became the first death of astronauts in flight. A few hours after the disaster, President Ronald Reagan delivered a speech from Washington, D.C., honoring the pioneers and providing comfort to the distressed nation. Number 17. The Third Phillippic. Known as one of the greatest orators of all time, Demosthenes loved his city-state of Athens. However, while Philip II of Macedon became more daring in his incursions in the Greek peninsula, the Athenians were stuck in an apathetic stupor. He then employed his influential oratorical skills to awaken his fellow Athenians. Sick of his brethren's apathy, he rallied them in 342 BC, just as Philip was advancing on Thrace, and boldly called them to action. After hearing his inspirational speech, they all cried out, "To arms, to arms." Number 16. We shall fight on the beaches. Given at the House of Commons, London, on June 4, 1940, it was given by one of the greatest orators of the 20th century, despite being born with a speech impediment, just like Demosthenes and the other greats before him. With his strong, reassuring voice, Winston Churchill boldly stated the following: "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Number 15. Duties of American Citizenship. A speech given by Theodore Roosevelt in Buffalo, New York on January 26, 1883, it probed into the theoretical reasons why every citizen must be involved in politics and the practicality of serving in that capacity. People must not excuse themselves from politics just because they're too busy and then blame the government for its ineptitude. Number 14. Farewell to Baseball Address. The famous speech delivered by Lou Gehrig at the Yankee Stadium on July 4, 1939, would go on forever as a tribute to his luminous career. Stricken with the crippling disease that now bears his name at a young age of 36, he spoke of things that he was grateful for rather than his declining health, at a tribute given him where he was presented with plaques, gifts, and trophies for his dedication to his record 2,130 consecutive games. Number 13, the Surrender Speech. This speech was given during a dark moment in American history when the military declared that Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce tribe had to move onto a reservation in Idaho or face retribution. Though Chief Joseph tried to avoid violence, some of his tribesmen dissented and killed 4 white men. To avoid the backlash of the military, they all set out for Canada to find amnesty. They were just a mere 40 miles from the border, however, when they were defeated after a 5-day battle. As they were in dire conditions, they had no choice but to surrender, and Chief Joseph's surrender speech on October 5, 1877 has been marked as one of the greatest moments of that period. Number 12, the Inauguration Address. Incoming presidents around the world give their inaugural addresses, but there's never been anything more gripping than the one delivered by a very young, ambitious John F. Kennedy. As the 35th President of the United States, he embodied the fresh optimism of a nation that had just risen out of decades of war. As the citizens listened to his inaugural speech, they felt that the nation was headed towards a new frontier. Number 11, Speech of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was known for his great conquest, but only a few knew of his oratory prowess. His talent for oration was developed while he was studying under Aristotle, and he made use of it at the latter end of his conquest to motivate his men. After lording it over the Persian Empire for 10 years, Alexander decided to continue his conquest into India, where they faced defeat against King Porus and his army. His men were weary from 10 years of battle, and they longed to go home. He then delivered a speech in 326 BC to inspire his men to continue on to fight and win, which was just the motivation they needed. Number 10, the Abolition Speech. William Wilberforce was a member of the British Parliament who converted to Christianity and later became an abolitionist. As a Christian, he sought to reform the evils within himself and the world, and since one of the glaring moral issues of his day was slavery, he read up on the subject and met some anti-slavery activists. On May 12, 1789, he delivered his abolition speech before the House of Commons, where he passionately made his case as to why the slave trade must be abolished. He also introduced a bill to abolish the trade, and though it failed, it did not stop him from attempting to pass the bill year after year until finally the Slave Trade Act was passed in 1807. Number 9, Duty, Honor, Country. General Douglas MacArthur was the now famous commander of Allied forces in the Pacific Theater during World War II. His chivalry, his experience in the battlefield, and his selfless sacrifice were all done for the sake of duty, honor, and country. This 1962 speech was given while accepting the Sylvanus Thayer Award for outstanding service to the nation. His address was intended for the soldiers who would tread the same course he did, reminding of their purpose in becoming soldiers. Number 8, Quit India. Mahatma Gandhi has become popular for pioneering nonviolent civil disobedient tactics and gaining independence. As war raged all over the world, India was fighting for its liberty as well from the rule of the British Crown, which ruled the country for over a century. Quit India was delivered by Gandhi on August 8, 1942, as he espoused a completely non-violent movement to oust the British with the help of the National Indian Congress. This led to the passing of the Quit India Resolution, which gave the country independence from British rule. Number 7, Their Finest Hour. Delivered by Winston Churchill on June 18, 1940 in the House of Commons, it was his third and final speech during the Battle of France. The Germans invaded France on May 10, 1940, but France's darkest hours came when Paris fell on the 14th of June, which led to its surrender. This left England as a lone bastion of democracy in Europe against Germany's fascism. Churchill's speech was very critical in boosting the morale of England's citizens and soldiers to make that dark hour their shining moment. Number 6, Funeral Oration. Pericles, which was dubbed by Thucydides as the first citizen of Athens, delivered this oratory piece in Athens in 431 BC. A statesman, general, and an orator, he was a product of Sophistus, tutored personally by the great philosopher Anaxagoras. He was a highly persuasive orator who influenced Athenians to build hundreds of temples, including the famous Pantheon. His speeches also inspired Athenians to become the most powerful in Greece. However, his skills in rhetoric were put to the test on February 431 BC during the annual public funeral for those who were slain in the war. He stood to the occasion to laud the glory of Athens and in inspiring the Athenians that their fallen heroes have not died in vain, similar to what Abraham Lincoln did during the Gettysburg Address 2,000 years later. Number 5, Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. One of the most famous pieces of rhetoric in recent history, this was delivered by Patrick Henry in Richmond, Virginia on March 23, 1775. Henry had always been in the center of the brewing revolutionary sentiments in Virginia, but was particularly embroiled in the Stamp Act of 1764. He delivered his alleged treason speech for the Virginians to ban the act. As the tensions between the colonies and the Crown escalated with Massachusetts patriots preparing for war, He also persuaded his fellow Virginians to strengthen their defenses with this famous line, "Give me liberty or give me death." Number 4, Citizenship in a Republic. Theodore Roosevelt was at the end of his term, and to give his successor, President Taft, time to adjust to the position, he traveled to Africa and Europe. In Paris, France, he was invited to speak at the University of Paris, where he delivered this famous speech on April 23, 1910. This powerful address delved into the requirements of citizenship and how democratic countries like the United States and France can stay tough and forceful amidst the fascist ideals of other nations. It was made famous by the man in the arena quote. Number 3, I Have a Dream. A speech given by Martin Luther King Jr. on August 28, 1963 in Washington, D.C. It's also considered one of the greatest oratory pieces in American history. A century after the Gettysburg Address and the Emancipation Proclamation, the promise of full equality was not yet fulfilled. Black Americans still experienced racial discrimination, but amidst all these, the voice of Dr. King sent out a message of hope. Number 2, the Gettysburg Address. Delivered on November 19, 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania by former U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, this was considered one of the greatest speeches in the history of American rhetoric. One of the 3 founding documents of American freedom, along with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, it was made up of 272 words and was 3 minutes long. After the Battle of Gettysburg, where 8,000 soldiers died and were buried in shallow graves, the community decided to build a cemetery for them. In the inauguration of the cemetery, Lincoln was asked to deliver a speech as a casual afterthought, and he penned this on the back of an envelope on the train. But the product of pure inspiration has resounded even into the future generations. And number 1, Sermon on the Mount. Given by Jesus Christ in 33 AD, believers and non-believers alike often consider the Sermon on the Mount to be one of the most influential speeches ever given. In fact, one would be hard-pressed to find a more quoted, discussed, or revered piece of oration in all of history. If you liked the video you just saw, then feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel by using the orange button in the top right. And don't forget to go check out our website at list25.com for more awesome lists.